We are live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a Mighty Blaze special cocktail hour edition. I'm Jenna Blum, one of the founders of The Blaze, and this evening I am here having French 75 with my friend, the novelist Alex George. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, Jenna.
You're like, I'm so scared of you right now, Jenna.
It's great.
You have wine. You can wine. It's okay. Okay. Cheers, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
It's also it's very early in Missouri. We're like an hour behind you. So.
It's not that early. It's 6 o'clock. Early is like 11 a.m.
Oh, well, fair enough. Right.
Unless it's brunch, in which case it's not early. Anyway, early or late, wherever you are, it is time to have a drink with us and celebrate Alex's new paperback of his latest novel, The Paris Hours, which I loved. Here it is. I'm finally going to learn how to hold it up correctly on StreamYard. La la, it's beautiful. First, a little commercial for The Blaze. If you are a returnee, welcome back. Thank you for being a usual suspect on our chats in the evening. If you are new to The Blaze, we are a team of 35 creative volunteers dedicated to helping writers connect with readers in the age of COVID and beyond. So if you like what you see here, please give us a like or a follow on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube. We are ubiquitous. Please consider signing up for our newsletter at www.amightyblaze.com so that you will never have literary FOMO ever again. We will tell you all the things that are coming up in the next couple weeks and months. Great festivals like Alex's Unbound. You never want to be left in the dark when it comes to all things books and writers. So join us. As I said tonight, we are so happy to have my friend Alex here. He is a novelist. He is the owner of Skylark Bookshop in Columbia, Missouri, which if you ever get a chance to go there is really like a gem of a bookstore. And I mean that in the most glittery, avaricious sense. Like, it is beautiful. It's like the Sephora of bookstores. I mean that in the best way. Look at this. That is a big compliment. It is just like this beautifully arranged, like colorful. Everything is gorgeous and luscious, and you just want to roll around in all the books. So you should definitely go to Skylark if you get a chance. In fact, make a pilgrimage. And Alex is also the founder of the Unbound Book Festival in Columbia, Missouri, which last time I was there hosted George Saunders as the keynote speaker. And that meant that I got to be in an elevator with George Saunders and totally F up that encounter, which we can discuss. But that's the informal Alex bio. And I'm going to read your formal bio, if that's okay with you, just so that you guys know who you're getting this evening. Okay, ready, Alex?
I'm ready.
God, this is a look. So Alex, as you may know, in addition to being a novelist, the owner of Skylark Bookshop and the director of Unbound, was born in England and has, as you shall hear when I stop talking, the most delicious accent to prove it. His first and second novels, A Good American and Setting Free the Kites, were #1 Indie Next Picks, Barnes & Noble Discover New Writers Picks, Amazon Best Book of the Month, Midwest Connections Pick, Library Reads Choice, and a Library Journal Best Book of the Year, Setting Free the Kites, which also had a gorgeous cover. Hi, Bob. Also won the 2018 Missouri Prize for Fiction. Alex's latest novel, The Paris Hours, which, as I said, is newly out in paperback, was published by Flatiron on May 5th of last year. It was also an Indie Next Pick and a Book of the Month selection, and it was on Best Book of the Month. It was an instant national bestseller, no surprise. In addition to his novels, Alex's work has appeared in the Washington Post, Literary Hub, and numerous other publications. But wait, there's more. So here's a little backstory. Alex read law at Oxford University and worked for 8 years as a corporate lawyer in London and Paris. So he knows all the Paris things. I was wondering how the authenticity in this Paris Hours book. Now we know. As mentioned, you own the wonderful Skylark, the founder and director of Unbound. And in addition to George Saunders, the guests have included Michael Ondaatje, Salman Rushdie, Zadie Smith, and moi, it must be said. Alex is a practicing attorney in his spare time, a concept at which I laugh. Haha. He also has an amazing writer, professor, and critic wife, Alexandra Sakarides. Did I pronounce that right?
Close enough. Yeah.
What is it?
Socarides, but
Socarides.
but listen, I've heard it mangled in many more creative ways than that.
I'm actually like
You got
Socarides. Yep. Your wife's name is Socarides. You're the two Alexes, and you live in Colombia still with 4 children. Hence my laughter about your spare time. I'm just like, how does that even happen that you do all these things? And you're a marathoner. Yes.
Yeah, well, I have run some marathons. Yes, that's right. That's right. Not for a while, but
cute, like also in his spare time. So, and now that we're talking, we both own black labs. My black lab has brought me his bear sack, because as soon as I start talking to people on StreamYard or Zoom, he gets out all his toys and mashes them violently against my leg. So we would like to see Theo, please, Alex.
Yes. So Theo is not quite as that's the he's alive. I promise you, he's not just like but that's that. Hey Theo, come and say hi.
Theo,
There we go.
We live for this. Hi, Theo. He looks as impressed as always.
Yes,
not
the poor dog is so fed up with me taking pictures of him, particularly when I go to the shop. He comes to the shop with me, and has this perennially fed up look because I'm forever taking pictures and saying, "Just look, can you put your chin up and look at this book?" And he suffers it all.
He does, because he's the mascot of Skylark, and he gets coerced into many photos. I hope he gets handsomely paid in treats or sausages. Or
he does, and in fact, his collar, he's got to lie down again. His collar actually says bookshop dog on it. So it's,
so cute, so cute. The dogs, we can, they have to earn their meals from advertising for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
I intend to put Henry to work. We have a question. We have many questions from the audience about you and about Theo, but does Theo like to be read to? Is the first question.
No, he really hates it. I've tried. We have a book. Well, we have lots of books about cats and dogs in the shop, and we have poems about cats and dogs. I think there is one which is called 500 Uses for a Dead Cat. He quite liked that one, but no. But by and large, it's like he prefers he's a little bit like our teenagers, the sort of 2-legged variety that we have, and he just prefers to be left alone most of the time. So, yeah.
You're surrounded by scorn and indifference with teenagers and a black lab.
Yes.
Except if there's food, probably, and then everybody's like, "Oh, well, I'm finding you temporarily useful," but
Yes, food certainly helps. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about your wonderful, wonderful book, The Parasite. I wish I had the paperback. I don't. I still have the beautiful hardcover, which has this mesmerizing, hypnotizing green on the cover. We were talking a little bit about this in the green room, like this unmatchable and gorgeous shade. The paperback, and Alex, tell us why you don't have your beautiful new paperback with you this evening, because I like this story.
Okay, so one of the things about being a writer and owning a bookstore is that the two professions very often sort of merge in odd and unexpected ways. For example, the publisher, for some reason that I don't really know, didn't get our paperback copies to us in time, and so as part of the publishing deal, the author gets a certain number of copies to give away or flog or burn or whatever it is you want to do with them, and I just had mine sitting in a box, and so on pub day I actually brought them into the shop so that we actually had some books to sell, and rather stupidly I didn't think to keep one here, so all of my author copies went to Skylark to be sold, and so therefore I, in a fit of, sort of massive unprofessionalism for which I apologize, don't actually have a copy to show you, but they are there. They do exist, I promise you.
They do exist. I have seen them, and I mean it is such a struggle, right, between like the writer self and the bookseller self. Like you really want to make sure that your book is being sold out into the world, and then you want to have one copy just to prove maybe that it's still real.
Yeah, it is, and there is so I've done 2 panels recently with other authors who also own bookstores, and I did one with Emma Straub and Danny Kane, and also another one with Kelly Link and Ann Patchett, and Anne is like consummate consummate pro, and it's like, and Emma was saying that Anne visited Emma's store and said, okay, this is what you need to do, and like you got to have this thing, and I'm very, very bad at all of that, and so my books are just in under the G's. And we've actually sold out of A Good American at the minute, so if people want it, we can't even sell it to them, which is like, it's not great. It's not great. So there are various different approaches, and we were actually talking about how it's one thing to go on a publicity tour and visit bookstores and tell people about your books and even say, please buy my book. It's very different, though, to actually be in your own shop and say, well, have you thought about this one? And that is very difficult to do. I'm getting slightly better at it, but it's just and I think sometimes customers take pity on me and say, well, he's going to be very upset if I say no. So I'll buy it. But I'm trying to do better at that. I'm trying to do better at selling my own book. But it's much easier to sell other people's books, frankly, because you can be a bit more enthusiastic about it.
Well, you can be aggressive about it, right? I mean, I always think that when I'm in somebody else's bookstore, since I don't own a bookstore, I do that thing where I go front my own books. Have you ever done that in another?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, so the interesting thing about my relationship with bookstores has undergone various different iterations over time. So originally, way back in the dim and distant past, bookstores were, as they are for most people, just a place of promise and of discovery and joy, and you would just go and like, who knows what you're going to find. And I used to love, when I lived in England, going into, there's this chain called Waterstones, which is very nice. Look, they sort of have a feel of an indie bookstore, and doing that. And then I published a book. And at that point, your relationship to bookstores as an author becomes much, much more complicated, because every time that you go into a bookstore, there is a danger of humiliation or some sort of complicated emotion in any event, and there really is no winning that, because either and I've had both. Either there are no books on the shelves, in which case you're going, why are there no books on the shelves? Or there are too many, in which case you're going, why is nobody buying my book? So there's literally no way that you can win that. So that was complicated, and then because of the success of the book festival, I decided we would open this bookstore, and so it's all changed again, but for the better. And it is being in the bookshop and being surrounded by books all day is just such a joyful thing, and it is the most fun I have ever had. It's incredibly hard work, but it is fabulous, and I get to read so many books now, and even though it's for work, it's still amazing. So it's been a joy. And my one regret is that when this book came out last May, of course, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I consoled myself. So obviously my book tour was cancelled, the launch party was cancelled, and I thought, well, never mind, we'll have a party when the paperback comes out. and here we are, still talking, on the internet. So what do they say about men plan and God laughs? It happens, but it's I don't think anybody knew quite how long this was going to go on for, but it's been a different kind of experience, certainly publishing during the pandemic. And there's certainly been some good things. I mean, one thing I was able to do when we sort of everybody rejigged everything, and of course, you and Caroline have done this incredible thing with The Blaze, which is such a blessing for so many authors and such a wonderful thing. But we've all learned to adapt, and one of the things it meant is I was able to do an event. I think I didn't. It was just it was with Rake Straw Books, I think, in Danville in California one day, and then the next day I was in Provincetown. So like without ever even sort of putting on my trousers. So so there are definite benefits to it as well. So.
Right, we don't have to wear pants anymore to go to events. It's fantastic. Like I told my team tonight that I was going to be really dressed up for the event from the neck up, basically. Like you don't want to know like the mess that is otherwise. But it's true. I mean, I am delighted to talk with you, and I'm thinking about your panels. You did one for Newburyport with Ann Patchett and so on, and the other one with the authors who own bookstores. So amazing. And in order to do that, otherwise you would have had to travel a long distance,
Right.
to like maybe one time a year instead of doing those events back to back. So I feel too, I'm kind of caught in that revolving door of circumstance with you. That I have a book coming out this year and people said, oh, by late October, of course you'll be doing your events in person. Nobody knows. So,
Right.
I mean, it's, as an author, I find that a heart bleeding situation, but as somebody who works with this incredible crew to connect people, I think, okay, how are we going to pivot? So
Right.
the amazing adaptability and resilience of authors and of publishers and publicists and everybody who loves books in this time to support each other has been amazing. But I so wanted you to be on tour with this book out in person. Do you miss it tremendously? Like, you do get a lot of public FaceTime and Congress in the store. You guys are open. I saw you're still wearing masks. You're not under a mask mandate, but you are wearing them in the store. I would love to hear more about that too.
Yeah, I mean, we've been open for a while, but we were closed for several months. And you talk about rightly about how everyone's sort of pivoted in so many ways. The other constituency that I would add into that is booksellers. I mean, we have, and every bookshop has had to adapt massively over the course of the last 14 or 15 months and have we changed our business model completely. We basically turned into a mail order business for a long time. Our doors were completely closed, and we sent everything out. Our mailman used to come into the shop and pick up a couple of parcels. He quickly stopped doing that and got the van, and would drive up at the end of the day. Poor Lowell's never quite recovered, but and we actually also began doing home delivery as well, and just driving around Columbia and delivering books at the end of the day, because it was basically anything we needed to do to get books into people's hands. And one of the other things that we did was when we began the bookstore back in 2018, we made a conscious decision not to have an e-commerce website, because the whole point was that you've got to come and talk to us, or at least speak to us on the phone, or send us an email. And so, but with the pandemic, of course, that had to change. And so we wanted to make it easy as possible for people to buy books. So we, from nothing, created this e-commerce website. And again, we're all in the market for silver linings these days, and that was one, and that is one that will stay. And it has proved wonderfully successful, and we're thrilled with how people have responded to it. So, we're pivoting constantly and making these decisions. And the day that we made this post about the fact that we were going to continue to insist that everybody wear masks, the CDC says you don't need to anymore. Right. But we haven't changed a thing, and it didn't change what we're doing, because we don't know if other people have been vaccinated or not. And so our responsibility is to keep everybody safe. And the only safe way that you can do that, we think right now, is just still to wear masks. So, it's been an adventure, and we did lots and lots of events online at the bookstore, rather than having events in the store, and that's been fun and a challenge. We sort of, during Unbound, which took place over 3 months, this just ended, we sort of stopped because there was only so many hours a day that we were actually able to do that. But so it's a continuing adventure, and because your book's coming out in October, isn't it?
It is late October.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll see the adventure continue. I know, right? Everybody's like, oh, that's so nice. It's like being on Saturday Night Live, where people are like, that's great. Oh my God, your ass, quietly. But, you never know. There are lots of ways to reach readers, I feel. And like The Blaze obviously is one, and all the online events, and Unbound being online. I was watching the events that you did for the festival, which got reinvented only, I want to say, 5 years into its lifespan, right? Yours is a young festival. And people, I have to say too, it is so worth, when you guys open up in person again for Unbound, or online, but when you're there in person, I went to Unbound in 2019, I want to say, with Chris Castellani and Sarah McCoy and Kate Christensen and Joanna Rakoff, who lives across the river from me in Boston, and we had to go to Missouri to see each other. and these fantastic people. And we all agreed afterwards that there was just an incredible sweetness about that festival. And I don't mean like a naivete or an innocence. It was just like the most good-natured, lovely festival in the most beautiful place, like this green pocket of Missouri with birds singing and little leaves coming out on the trees. And all of the panels were interesting. And there was just this great spirit of bonhomie. And we loved it. And I came away thinking of that as like this little Eden. Like we knew at the time that it was a little pocket of Eden, but now we're like, oh, we were so lucky to go to Unbound. So it has been amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I? But it is great. But for me, one of the many joys of it is getting to invite people who I've known for years online and actually meeting them in person. And you're a good example of that. Caroline's another one. We actually did an event together. Our last books came out around about the same time, and so she and I did an event at the year before, I think. And Chris, again, is an author who I've admired for years, and I finally found a way of dragging him to Missouri. So that's been such a joy and it's such a privilege too. Yeah.
It's so nice. I know. I actually got to meet Jennifer Hay for the first time. She's another Bostonian, but I managed to pin her against a wall at Unbound and be like, "Hi, I love you. You've been avoiding me at Grub Street for so many years, and now you're here and you can't get away." It was great. So invite me back. I loved it. And my George Saunders story is that when I first got to Unbound, I was in the elevator going down to the opening night cocktail party. There's this gentleman gets on the elevator with me. Like, I'm dressed up, of course, with like false eyelashes and shit. This guy gets on. He has like this tweedy jacket and a beard and glasses. And I'm like, oh, he's probably a writer and he's going to want to talk about books, whatever. So I'm like deliberately looking away like this because I don't really feel like talking about books until I have my cocktail. And the next evening we were at the keynote and I was like, is that who that man was in the elevator? That was George Saunders, ha 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 ha, who I worship. So hopefully I will have another crack at him because he's such a lovely, menschy guy, like right in the,
He totally is. And it was interesting because we wanted to have him for some time. And everybody said, oh, he is the nicest man.
So nice.
He is the kindest man, to the point where I was going, okay, no one is that nice. No one is that nice. But he is. I mean, he really genuinely is unbelievably nice. In addition to being utterly, utterly brilliant. And his talk that he gave that night for the keynote was just, it was amazing. And some of the questions at the end, the kindness that he showed and the generosity of spirit that he showed was just amazing, which is also, by the way, evident in his new book, which if you haven't read it, I highly, highly recommend it. It's called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. And it's about these 7 short stories by 4 different Russian authors. Those stories are reprinted in full. Then he talks about them. And then after each essay, there's a little bit, for me, this is the real treasure of the book. He talks about his own process and his own writing process. And it's just golden. It's absolutely golden. And if you are a writer, or if you're interested in writing, get that book. It's really fantastic.
It is really luscious. I listened to it actually, just to sort of have it read to me. And we had him on the Blaze. Our thoughtful bro, Mark Cecil, managed to pull George out of a hat, and we were all like, "We don't know how you did that, but amazing." And so I was listening to the book beforehand, and it actually made me like the Russians in a different way. Like I had last read the Russian short stories in college and couldn't keep the names straight. It was probably some state-induced drinking problem, at the time. But the book made me think about them in a different way. And it also confirmed my suspicion that when George Saunders thinks, it's in a sort of 3-dimensional or maybe multi-dimensional chess game that the rest of us can't really play as well, but it's all about fiction. It's like chess meets origami meets fiction. It was just this sort of fantastic experience. I felt enriched afterwards.
And he's a master of the simple but perfect metaphor. And there's something in that book about the way that he writes, and there was some metaphor which I'm not even going to try and repeat because I will kill it dead. But it's about moving into an apartment and bringing in furniture one bit a week, and it's so good. It's so good and so perfect, and that's you should all read it. It's great.
It is a gem of a book. So writers, take note. If you're not a writer and you want to know how writers think, or at least you want to know how George Saunders thinks and the rest of us aspire to think, then you should read Swim in the Pond in the Rain. Is superb. So let's talk about your book, which, okay, I did it right. I held it up right. I had actually the same feeling about the Paris Hours that you're having about George Saunders' Swim in the Pond in the Rain. That Paris Hours, for those of you who have not yet read it, you have such a treat in store, and not just because it's set in Paris. I actually I'm not a huge Francophile. Like, I like the hats, and I love and I love Paris, and I love jazz, and I love, Josephine Baker, and was kind of raised to all of this stuff. Love Montmartre, love the Sacré-Cœur, can't speak French to save my life. But this book got me in a different way. That usually when I approach books or movies about Paris, I feel inadequate, because I feel as though this piece of art is going to present to me something so beautiful that I, as a mere mortal, am not really able to appreciate it properly. Like, I feel the same way about the cherry tree behind me when it blooms. I just think I could sit here 24 hours a day and still not be able to appreciate it adequately. And Paris to me is like that. It's intimidating in its beauty. However, your book really enters it through the lives of the people who live in it. And it's a kaleidoscope that takes place over a single day, for those of you who haven't read it, of intersecting stories. And this is one of my favorite things to do in fiction. I've always wanted to do it. I've never had the chops to do it. I admire writers who do it so beautifully, to have these people intersecting in this gorgeous mosaic. And they all seem so real. And so you're not in Paris, beautiful Paris. You're in a place where people live that has charm and idiosyncrasy and smells like sewer, or smells like cheese, or looks like puppets, or looks like. So I'm just so curious about how you chose the vignette structure for this book and how you wrote it. Let me ask you one question at a time. How did you choose the vignette structure of the novel?
Well, I mean, I don't remember when I thought it would be a good idea to set the thing over the course of a single day. It was once I had made the decision, I sort of stuck by it, and I'm very glad that I did. But oh my goodness, it was a pain because and when you have these 4 stories that are told in very strict rotation. So you have these 4 stories going on, but but the day progresses chronologically. So it was a nightmare to write, because if you change one thing, it's like dominoes. Everything collapses, and suddenly there are glitches in the space-time continuum, sort of all over the place. So that was very, very hard to do. And there were many times when I was sort of cursing this decision to keep it in one day. But I think people liked it. There's a certain compactness to it, and there's a forced economy. It's not a very long book. Not that just because a book is set in one day, it doesn't have to be long. Ulysses, anyway, so that was kind of how that came about. And it is more complicated still, because there are flashbacks as well, sort of telling some people's backstories. So trying to, and the challenge was doing all of this in a way that wasn't going to completely befuddle the reader. And my wife actually very early on said, you've got to keep that order strict. You can't go A, B, C, A, D, B, C, A, B. You've got to give people a chance. And so that was the best advice that I got, was to keep that strictly rotating order. And then one of the other things that I did, and this is just a visual cue, but so for the first time ever, I gave my chapters titles.
Yes, I love the titles. I love them.
Well, which I mean, I struggle coming up with titles for the book. So coming up with, let me see, 42 different titles was a nightmare, but I did it, and I did it. So I don't know whether you can see, how am I going to get this to show? But that's not working.
It's hard and streaming.
There we go. And you can see they're clustered in groups of 4. So that was kind of like a visual cue for the reader as to what was going on, and people, hopefully they get into a rhythm. And reading some of the things that people have said about it, a lot of people said that to begin with it was a little tough to sort of understand what was going on, but then they worked it out, and then it began to flow. So that was all quite complicated to do. And in terms of the actual writing of it, needless to say, the order in which the pages appear and the words appear bears absolutely zero resemblance to the order in which they were written. I wrote about 5 or 6 chapters of one character at a time, and then the next, and the next, and then I would literally shuffle them together. So that they were sort of, and then I would read them, and then of course realize it was completely screwed up and that wasn't going to work. And then I started moving things around. But yeah, so it was technically a real challenge to do it. But I always like to set myself new challenges when I start a new book, and I'm glad I got that one out of the way, so I don't need to.
No more Vignette with 4 partners. I love that you said this. I was fascinated by this because I did the same thing with my first book, which has only 2 timelines, but I wrote all of one first and the second, and then literally shuffled them together like a deck of cards and said, oh, now the transitions make no sense and you have to work on this and massage this. So when I looked at the structure of the Paris hours, I thought, first of all, genius to have it take place over a single day. I thought that might make it more containable as opposed to like 50 years where you can shift in and out of various eras. But it also, I thought, this is what I did, but it's squared. It's like a quartet as opposed to a duet. And I just thought it was virtuosic. It was a lot like a piece of music that was had beautiful variations on its themes so that you never get bored, but you were also sort of trained to know what to expect as the reader. Like, oh, this person just had a say. Now this person is going to have a say. It might be in the present or it might be in the past. And I appreciated that. When I teach my novel workshops, I tell the people in the class to do the same thing, that if they have rotating narrators, please do it evenly, because otherwise, as the reader who has had a long day and maybe a glass of wine or something, it's so hard to remember all of your beloved people unless you give them some continuity and some regularity. And I was grateful for that. But the hat trick as the author is to implement this structure and then make the reader forget about that entirely and draw them into this spell of being in another place. And I found the book wove such an enchantment for me that it allowed me to armchair travel in the way my favorite books do. Like I could just dip into one of these, and they are very short vignettes, people. Like each chapter is about 2 or 3 pages long, or maybe 5 pages at most. Each one is like its own little spell. And hence the sort of George Saundersy gem, like, I could pick up the book anywhere at random and dip in and be like, oh, now I'm in Montmartre, and now I'm an artist, or now I'm somebody who has lost a leg, or now I'm in love with this unattainable woman, and they unfold as you go along into the origami of backstory. So were you conscious of weaving the spell while you wrote? Did you feel yourself as though you were back in the spell of Paris when you wrote the book?
Yes. I mean, I very much in my mind when I was writing, I'm not a visual person. In that I'm terrible. Don't ask me to decorate a room.
That's so surprising to me because the imagery is gorgeous. But please go on.
Well, but so what I try and do instead is to use words to sort of paint to do the same thing. And I lived in Paris. I went to school there, and I worked there as a lawyer for a year. And so I know it quite well. And so when and also Google is a wonderful thing. So I could go and sort of go on the Google Maps. And once I worked out how to sort of drive forward down the street, which took a while, I could actually, because a lot of people they walk all over the city. It's an excellent, Paris is a wonderful city to walk in. And so I have people going up and down the boulevard and so on and so forth. And so I very much would go in my mind and inhabit, walk in their shoes. And that allowed me to, I hope, conjure up that sense of place.
Mm.
Now, and it's an interesting challenge when you write about Paris, because people, even if they've never been to Paris, they think that they know what it's like. And as a writer, you want to balance meeting those expectations, but at the same time giving people something else as well that's going to surprise them. And so that was an interesting challenge to me. And the way that I addressed it was to not take people to the places that they might have been if they had been to Paris, but to take them to the the back streets and the parks where regular people go.
Mm-hmm.
And Paris is unlike some cities in that people do actually live all over the place. It isn't as if there's one area. There aren't there are lots of sort of more suburban areas around it, but people live in the center, and they always have done. And so, I was trying to give a flavor of this other Paris. Not so that was fun to do as well. And I remember on occasion I would sort of sit down in the morning, and I write very early in the morning. I get up at 5, and that's right. And I remember before switching off the internet one time, I sort of I wrote on Facebook or something, right, I'm off to Paris now. Close down the internet. And then when I opened it up again, so 2 hours later, everyone was going, oh, you lucky thing. Oh, when you and I had to then write and go, no, only in my head.
In my mind.
But I have, during the course of the writing of the book, I did go back. My wife was at a conference, and I sort of tagged along. And while she was off talking about Emily Dickinson, I was sort of going around to the various bits and places in the book to sort of check that I had everything right. And there were certain sort of architectural features. There's one church in particular I wanted to know if it had a back door, so I was able to go and do all of that. So that was fun to do that as well. So, and Paris it's so easy to write about, though, because it's so gorgeous, and it's a sensory sort of overload almost, and it was fun.
That's what I felt. I would need to just go and sit on a stoop, like a different stoop every day in Paris, and just sit there and look around the stoop and be like, okay, I've appreciated the beauty of that stoop. When you were living there, did you have a favorite place that you encoded into the book?
Yeah, well, I didn't encode it. I just stuck it in there. Père Lachaise, the cemetery that appears, which is where Marcel Proust is buried, and the first time we meet Camille is actually there. And I used to love going there very early on a Sunday morning, and in my memory, it was almost always raining, or at least very, very misty, and scary as hell, or it would have been if it hadn't been first thing in the morning. And there is, and it's an enormous cemetery, and it's on a hill, and the French do death better than most. Very sort of dramatic graves, and of course Père Lachaise is full of very famous tombstones, whether it's Jim Morrison or Oscar Wilde or Marcel Proust or Edith Piaf. I could go on, and so that's a place that I love, and so I always knew that I was going to include that.
I mean, the French are the best at so many things. Cheese, death.
Cheese, yes, cheese.
Aging gracefully, like all of the things. Wine.
Smoking.
Did you smoke while you were in Paris?
Yeah, I think I must have. I mean, I used to be. I'm an ex-smoker, so I probably did. Yeah.
Yes, I used to smoke Gauloise when I did my junior year abroad in London. Went to Paris and came back to Ohio thinking I was all that, and I had like packs of Gauloise that I had imported and would smoke them on campus in the dining hall wearing my LL Bean. Nobody was impressed really, but so amazing. I also wanted to ask you about the role of music in the book, which I found super evocative. My mom was a concert pianist. And
really?
Yeah, she was. And so I was so lucky to grow up in a household that was full of piano. Both my parents were so heavily invested in music and classical music in particular, but also in jazz and in thank you, Margaret. My team is trolling me. But I don't know half as much, or maybe even a quarter as much as I would like to about music. And so I felt the book was teaching me by osmosis by incorporating so much music into it. Can you talk a little bit about the role of music for you in this novel?
Yeah, I mean, I love writing about music, and all of my books have a ton of music in them. This one was more focused than some, but there was jazz. Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue is in there, but the for me the musical heart of the book is there's a piece by Maurice Ravel. And it's called the Piano Trio. And the third movement of this piano trio is one of the most heartbreaking pieces of music you'll ever hear. And I, in my head, took this piano, violin, and cello and turned it into a solo piano piece. And this is a piece that appears at various points in the book. And one of the reasons why I love writing about music is because it's so bloody hard, because you're using a completely different medium to describe a thing. And so what can you do? Well, you have to rely on metaphor. You've got to evoke sentiment and emotion that the music evokes in you and try and describe it in that way. There's a great line, I was talking about this the other day. Thelonious Monk, who is a hero of mine, once said that writing about music is like dancing about architecture, which I was like, but you know, I love a challenge. So and one of the things that I did was, when this piece appears, and it appears 2 or 3 times, I use basically word for word the same language, and so it appears again.
I noticed that. Okay, now I understand. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so just like trying to evoke the same thing. And yeah, I mean, music is it's very important to me. And so I always, as I say, I always include it in the book. And, you know, I mean, Paris in 1927 was just such an astonishing time creatively, that, you know, I wanted to include music, but also, you know, one of the main 4 characters, Guillaume, is a painter, because the idea of not having a painter in Paris in 1927, frankly, just struck me as being a little perverse. You know, because there was so many people, whether it was Picasso or Braque or whoever, and so just the whole artistic feel and everything that was going on. And in fact, the idea for this book originally came about. I thought I was going to write an entirely different book based on Serge Diaghilev, who was a Russian impresario who went to Paris from Russia and began Les Ballets Russes, which was this like phenomenally innovative dance company. And what was so fascinating about him, or what I found fascinating about him, was that he surrounded himself with this incredible team of people. So he had Matisse paint the backdrops, or Marc Chagall would paint the backdrops, and Coco Chanel would design the costumes, and Cocteau would write the libretti, and Stravinsky would write the music, and Ravel wrote music for him too. And when I discovered all this, I was going, oh, well, there's my book. I'm just gonna write about that. And anyone who's read the book will know that poor old Serge Diaghilev doesn't appear in the book at all, because I began doing research and realized that, well, I worried, first of all, that I wasn't going to be able to do justice to all of that genius. And then I also thought, well, also, they don't need me to you know, if you look at a Marc Chagall painting or listen to a Ravel melody, I mean, the art speaks for itself. They don't actually need me to tell the reader what it's about. So I decided to redraw the focus to these 4 other characters. Now there are still famous people in the book. You know, you mentioned Josephine Baker, and you know, Ernest Hemingway and Gertrude Stein and various other people are there, but they're very much on the periphery of the thing rather than at its heart.
That was so interesting to me. And one of the questions that we had come in, I'm just going to pop this on the screen with apologies to my producers, but how do you incorporate music into words, which I thought was such an amazing question. And I just wanted to read something that struck me again, I'm putting on my glasses for you, Alex, because I was so struck by this passage. But I dog ear the bottoms of the pages when I love, something, and then I underline it in the book. So all my books are hideously, marked up, and I would apologize. But to me, it's like such a mark of love when a reader does that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So this is like the first thing I underlined, and it's on page 6, guys. Like the book is like rife with underlining, but the clarinet, that first low trill, fat with promise, which I love. I was like, that adjective, fat with promise, is so right to describe the clarinet. Then the solo ascent to the heavens, soaring smoothly through the registers. By the time that ecstatic high note, limpid and beautiful, pours into his ears, Jean-Paul has made his escape. And I thought, it's so hard, in fact, to write about music that when I was in grad school, our director prohibited us from writing about music and also prohibited us from writing about art. I think because of the difficulty of translating one art into another art using the medium of words, it's kind of like pouring something through a trombone, like pouring liquid through a trombone to make it come out as a cake. It's really, really hard. But when a writer can do it, he does it so well. Like, that to me is this like dizygotic sort of trick that is amazing, and that is so stamped through the Paris Hours, and that's why I loved the music in it so much. And now I'm like, oh, that's why the word fat with something has like appears over and over when describing music, because it's like a repetition on a theme. So I feel very smart. Thank you for making me feel smart this evening. That was super lovely. I have one more question for you, and then I've seen a bunch of audience questions come in. Oops, sorry guys, I'm going to take that off now. My own question, but approaching like writing about art is difficult. Writing about music is difficult. Pulled that off beautifully. Was it also difficult approaching writing somebody like Josephine Baker, who is this amazing Black dancer and singer in Paris? Like, if you guys don't know her, she was just this iconic. There was a restaurant in New York called Chez Josephine that was on the lower west side that my parents used to take me to because it was near where my dad worked at CBS. So he'd get off work and we'd go in, and it would be like 11:30 at night, and I was like 7. And we would go into this restaurant that was this tiny railway restaurant owned by a protege of Josephine Baker named Jean-Claude. And Jean-Claude would save us the front table. And then like maybe around 1 a.m., a woman in a sailor suit would get up on the zinc bar and dance. So I'm like, oh, and Josephine Baker was like painted on the wall and these fantastic murals. And, so reading this book, I was like, oh, there she is. And I learned things about her that I didn't know from my childhood admiration of this woman with beautiful bare breasts who is this famous chanteuse. So what was it like writing about Josephine, writing about Proust, writing about Hemingway, about Gertrude Stein, who is like a handsome man in this book, where Alice is like not so good looking? How did you steel yourself to write about these famous people?
I mean, I had fun with it, and I think that that's the important thing. I mean, I have certain rules about it in that sort of, you need to honor these people, and it's important that you do your research. And so, I would say, well, if I'm going to write about someone, I need to read at least 2 books to get a sense. And what I would do is read as much as I could. I've certainly read more books about Proust than I have read Proust. And some, and so I read a lot, and then I would try and ingest as much as I could by osmosis, and then just write and not worry too much about verisimilitude or whatever. I tried to sort of capture their voice in whatever way that I could, and then see what came out, and then you can tinker with it afterwards. But to me, the key is, and you mentioned Chris Castellani earlier, and I think that Leading Men is a perfect example of this. When you're writing about real people, we as novelists inhabit the spaces where we don't necessarily know we don't know for sure what went on. I think it's important that you don't write something that couldn't have happened, but where there is a hole, you can fill it. So, for example, in Leading Men, Tennessee Williams had this summer in Italy, and nobody knows what went on there. And so Chris told this beautiful, beautiful story answering that question and filling it in. And I sort of did the same thing. So all of the people who appear in the book were in Paris at that time. But I took enormous amount of license in terms of giving them word. So there's, for example, there is a scene that takes place in Shakespeare and Company, and Sylvia Beach is there, the owner, and Hemingway and Gertrude Stein talking about a painting, and they're having a rather ill-natured squabble. Which, by 1927, those two were really not getting on. A few years earlier, there was this immense love fest, but there was eventually the two monstrous egos got in the way, and by then they were sort of bickering most of the time if they were talking at all. And so that was sort of the parameters with which I had to work, and so and I sort of wrote into that. And with Josephine Baker, I mean, again, incredible person, wonderful material, if you like, to work with. And all of these people just have cameos, but I had immense fun doing the research and then just trying to animate them as best I could so that they came off the page, and sort of and it was fun to have Hemingway dance with Josephine Baker, and the way that Josephine Baker reacted to him. It was fun. And again, it's all about honoring them in the holes and the gaps, and trying to fill them in as best you can. But people, of course, these days, there's a great book called Josephine Baker's Last Dance by Sherry Jones, which is an entire book about Josephine Baker. I haven't got the balls to try anything that ambitious, but so for me it was very much, well, we're going to put a little bit in here and a little bit over there. And
yes, I loved it. Actually, it reminded me, and I hope this is, you take it as the compliment that it's intended to be, but one of my favorite movies is Midnight in Paris, and it's the same way. It's like Owen Wilson is sort of wandering in an Owen Wilson-y kind of way through the streets of Paris, but like Hemingway shows up every once in a while, completely smashed and says, "Who wants to fight?" And then like wanders drunkenly off screen again. And I just feel like, okay, that's kind of like the ratio of famous people you have in the book, or the amount we see them. Whitney Scherer also has a great book called
it's a fabulous book.
Miller. And she says exactly what you did and what Chris did too. It's like, you're taking a liberty with the lives of real people, so you have to be respectful. But at the same time, maybe novelists can do a service by shading in some of the things that might have happened that were lost. And one of the things I loved that I imagined was true was seeing Josephine Baker as a child in America before she became so famous and so sophisticated. And she was crawling around under food vendors' stalls in a farmer's market, picking up bruised fruits and vegetables to eat. And I thought, I bet that was actually a true anecdote.
That was.
It just gave me a shading to her story that I would not have imagined before. And I think that's one of the things great historical fiction does, is it gives you this information by osmosis that you pick up like while you're reading. I know we have so many reader questions. I've kept you so long already. I could talk about this endlessly. How is Proust present in the Paris hours in 1927, although he died in 22? Ooh, Margaret, why would you even ask such a thing? It's fiction. My God.
Well, no, but he
taught you nothing.
Well, the first thing that happens in the book when we meet Camille is that she's going to his grave. And so yes, he died 5 years previously, but there's the beauty of flashback. So Proust does appear, but only in flashback. And the relationship between Camille and Proust. So exactly what we were just talking about honoring. I always think when writing about real people is that I always take this sort of defensive posture, in that you don't want to say anything that's manifestly wrong. And so funny story with Camille, the Proust's maid. She's based very, very significantly on Proust's actual maid, Celeste Alberet, to the point that for the first several years while I was writing it, the character's name was Celeste. And then, as the plot developed and as I made these various things happen, I became uncomfortable because there were things that I had her do or had happen that did not happen. And then and every writer has their own sort of barometer in terms of what ethically they feel able to do. And at some point there was too much, and so I felt I was deliberately and wrongly misrepresenting the historical sort of facts as they were, and so I changed the name. And then I suddenly had license to make her do all sorts of things that she didn't do. But a lot of the historical stuff in there about Proust is true, and it's actually based on the memoir that Celeste wrote about him towards the end of her life. And he was such an interesting character. I mean, a deeply, deeply weird person, but I think ultimately a very kind one. And he adored Celeste, and Celeste adored him. And I hope that comes across, even though I changed the name.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about was, Anissa had a great question about the writing process, writing, editing, or research. Maybe you can fold the question in that I have with Anissa's question, which is, was Proust's writing process really as you describe it in the book? And can you describe for us, for those who haven't yet read The Paris Hours, what his process was? Because it made me feel better about my own wacky process, I have to say. Like, at least I'm not Proust, so I'm doing pretty well.
I mean, the man was a mess. He was a complete mess. So he was obsessed. He didn't do anything else. He was so. I mean, these days he would be diagnosed with a ton of things that sort of ADHD and everything. I mean, he couldn't. He was had zero tolerance for any kind of smell. Any kind of noise. His walls, famously, he wrote in his bedroom, and they were all cork-lined walls. And he insisted that his coffee come from a particular place. He was very, very sort of had these weird peccadillos that he really insisted on. But all that was true, and he just wrote and wrote obsessively and kept the strangest hours. He would get up in the middle of the afternoon and then go to bed at sort of 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning and then sleep. And then his maid, poor Celeste, had to sort of follow his hours. So it was a very strange relationship in that way, and he was entirely dependent upon her in many ways. So it was weird, and but from that grew this tremendous intimacy and respect, which was a rather lovely thing.
I learned from this book that I need a maid, obviously.
We all need a maid.
To follow my hours, right? And also to sort of own my writer weirdness. I find myself apologizing to people if I don't answer my phone or text them before 10 because I stay up until 2:30 working, because that's my writing time. I'm not an early morning writer. I'm I guess I am an early morning writer. But I apologize so much for this. And when I was reading Paris Hours, I thought, well, Proust was not apologizing. He was
he didn't apologize to
anyone.
anyone.
Make my coffee strong. We all need to be Proust people. We all need to be Proust writers. Yes. So I guess we have, and Anissa said we all need a maid. Are you a peripatetic thinker? Interesting. Explain. This is a great question. And also, Anissa had the question too about your favorite part of the writing process. But are you more of a spatial thinker, especially given the structure of this book? Do you think in architectural terms?
No, not really. I mean, I wish. I mean, the structure of this book was so specific that I thought, well, I'm just going to try. I'm just going to see whether this works or not. I mean, and this does sort of tie into, and this is other question about the favorite part of the writing process, writing, editing, or research. I mean, I like all of them, but most of the writing, I'm interested to know what you think, Jenna, but doing the editing, when you have a rough first draft, and I mean, I'm continually rewriting anyway, but taking this thing and then turning it into, giving it a polish and just making it better every time you go past. And again, to go back to George Saunders, his practice is one of rewriting, and mine is too. And so I love to rewrite and I use a pencil and on paper, and I do it like that. And because there's a real sense that, well, this is better now than it was 2 hours ago. and you've actually improved the thing. And that's a wonderfully, a lot of writing is usually metaphorically, occasionally literally banging your head against a wall, and particularly during writing the first draft. And so when you have a thing that you can actually then start working on and improving is great. And this book in particular, because of the structure and because of the amount of work that it takes, you make one tiny change and then all of these other things have to be amended. It really I learned a lot about rewriting. It's something I've always done. I just throw stuff in and then spend, I think probably with every book I've written, I take out more than what remains. So I have to write a lot in order to actually end up with something workable at the end of it all.
Absolutely. I think there is no one right way to do this, right? And one of the reasons I love to hear about process is that people generally have such different processes from each other, but you're one of the first writers I've ever spoken with who has a process much like mine. I do not like generating the first draft because it's a mess. And I have a container store mind, right? So I very much like when I've written the first draft and I can go back and clean it up and organize it and make it better. And the itchy part is when you're like, I know this isn't working. I don't know how to fix it yet. Right. And then I'm a bit of a bear to live with until one day, like in the shower, I'm like, oh my God, I totally know how to fix it. And it's one of the rare times in my writer life where I actually act like a Proustian writer, where I like run out of the shower, dripping everywhere and like bang it down, before you forget, because you're so afraid it's going to go away.
Yep.
I love that. I love the end stages of writing too, where you've been working so long on something, trying to come up with exactly those solutions and the pieces slot into place because you've earned it by thinking about it for 3 years. And you think, oh, that's how it was supposed to be all along. It's so, so satisfying. So I have to let you go. I want to ask one last question, which is, what are you working on now?
So it's been a really rough year. Yeah. I was at a bookseller conference last October in Cleveland, and Emma Straub was there talking about All Adults Here, which if you haven't read, you absolutely should. It's fabulous. And somebody asked her a similar sort of question, and she said, well, I always make it a policy to at least have my feet under the table with the new book when the hardcover comes out. So I don't get too distracted by all of the work that I have to do publicity wise. And I went, yeah, no, that makes sense. And is great in theory, but in practice, that is like, didn't happen this time around. And it's partly because of the pandemic. It's partly because I just couldn't settle on the right idea. So I have begun 3 different books, and I wrote somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 words for all 3 of them, and then abandoned them all because, I write so slowly that I've really got to be sure that the story has got legs and that it's really one that needs to be written. And so I was trying stuff out, it didn't quite work. But I've now found a thing that I really believe in. I'm super excited about it. I'm not going to say too much about it because I do believe that you can sort of let the heat out of the oven by talking about it too much. Also, if I do try and talk about it, I will sound like an idiot. And I know this because I have spoken to certain people about it. My mother, for example, who by the end of the explanation was as slack-jawed in disbelief that I thought this could possibly be a novel. So I'm not going to try.
Don't tell your mom anything. Don't ever tell your mom anything is my, my advice for all writers. Like, mom's always right. So just don't, hold it to your chest so you don't know those things. Oh my gosh, so right. And I again feel quite heartened because I've never, ever been able to start something new while I'm promoting something else. I'm a single tasker. Which is why I write slowly. You, my friend, do not write slowly. I write like a book every 5 to 10 years. So you're ahead of me. But you're doing so much good in the writer world. In addition to giving us your beautiful work, you're giving us a bookstore and you're giving us a conference, and I'm giving us like a dog walk. So we appreciate you. We love you. We love your work. Everybody buy The Paris Hours, please. Buy several copies. Good for Mother's Day because your mom wants to go to Paris too. Sure. And everybody who is stuck at home or is just venturing out into the world and maybe taking a flight needs to have this. book. So buy it and read it, enjoy it. It's beautiful. Your soul will feel fed. Go eat some really aromatic cheese afterwards and just enjoy, right? Thank you for this joy, Alex. This is so great.
Thank you, Jenna. It's been so much fun.
It's always fun, right? It's always fun to
Yeah.
talk to you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.